Okay, students, I'm going to give you general guidelines on how to do a proof. I've given to you an idea in your notes, but here you can just physically see it, and we'll go through this proof here. Okay, step one always is to write down givens. And then your justification is given, as you see right here. Put them all there. Like I told you on the DCAS, sometimes they will split up the givens and put one or two in the first step and put another one down below. So on the DCAS, I would look at all my givens and find them all in case they're not all in step one, find the other givens and identify, because it's going to be a drop-down menu to choose from, and identify the givens. Okay. Step two. Now, this doesn't always happen in the DCAS, but I'm saying as far as you writing your proofs, this is what I would do. Identify your free piece, such as vertical angle theorem, reflexive property of congruence. When you have either a side being congruent to itself or an angle being congruent to itself. And the last major one is the alternate interior angles theorem. When I have parallel lines cut by a transversal, then I know alternate interior angles are equal. Those are the main three that you can get by yourself. Okay. Step three would be identify any definitions from the givens. Okay. Your justification would be definition of that word. So of that vocab word. In most cases. Okay. Lastly, there might be one or two extra steps in there if it's a long proof, but this is generally, what's me lastly is what you are trying to prove. Actually, not lastly. Let's put in. I need to extend this page more. Okay, 4 would be triangle congruence. Okay, you're trying to prove prove two triangles congruent, and those justifications, as we just have taken a quiz on it, are your SAS, SSS, ASA, AAS, or HL. One of those 5. Okay, only one of them. And then, so if you're going beyond proving triangles congruent, that could be your last step. Okay, if it asks just to prove two triangles congruent, that's gonna be your last step. Okay, possible last step if you're just trying to prove two triangles congruent. If it has, say, prove this angle is congruent to this angle, or this side congruent to this side, then that's going to take place after you prove the triangle is congruent, pretty much. And so here would be your final step. In that justification, you should remember now, anything pretty much we use after proving triangles congruent is by CPCTC. Okay, so that right there should give you a general idea of how to set up all your proofs. Okay, now on the DCAS, doing steps 2 and 3 can be in reverse order, and that's what they've done here in this particular problem. I always do identify my free points second, but they did it, quote, third. They did the other ones first. Okay, they did number 3 first, identify your definitions. It does not matter. In this case, in a lot of cases, your free piece is not dependent on on definitions, for example. It's already freely through vertical angle theorem, reflexive property, or AIA. Okay, so 2 and 3 can be switched. I just always put it in this order. Okay, because I don't want to end up forgetting my free point. The free piece I need to get on my own. So after writing down the givens, I want to identify that, get that out of the way right away. Then I'll go back up and look at the givens and look for vocab words in there to use. So if I look back up, so notice here they were obviously they were done the given first. Now they did their reflexive property, like I said, in the third spot as opposed to the second spot, and they did their definitions. So this is the free piece. This would be like my step number 2. I would have put that as step number 2. Then they did their definitions right here. My step number 3, dealing with definitions. Okay, they did that in step 3. And then lastly, in this case, they were trying to prove 2 triangles congruent, so they've been done at step 4. Okay, your last step is always what you're trying to prove. And just so you know, when you write down what you're trying to prove as your last step, it needs to be written, and I should have said this, I'm guessing I said it in the other videos as well, exactly how it says in the exact order that it says right there in the problem itself. So I don't get to switch the order. I don't write CAD congruent to CBD. It says ACD and BCD. I do exactly, and just copy down exactly as it is. And anytime you're trying to prove triangles congruent, it's going to be by one of those 5 ways that I've already identified right here. That is it. Okay, so you already know if your final idea is to prove 2 triangles congruent, your justification form better be there. And just like in our quiz, you better have those marked on your diagram. Okay, I better see the SSH to the SAS. So that means above, somewhere in the above 3 steps, I've got to be able to have it identified as those 3 markings on the drawing. Okay, so now another piece on reflexive property. Okay, the order to write it in. You always want to go back and look at the congruent statement right up here. Okay, or if they gave you angle measures up in the given, use that. Okay, because it's going to tell you the corresponding order. So notice on triangle ACD, it goes CD, and on BCD, it goes CD. So it tells me that C matches up with C and D matches up with D. Okay, sometimes, depending on the triangle, it could be CD matches up with DC, and it's still reflexive property. It's the same segment, but you remember you have to write it in corresponding order. So check if they've given you, they usually will have given you the triangle congruence, or they'll give you some angle that's congruent to another angle, and so that has to be in corresponding order when they've given that to you. And so use that, and then you can't blow it. You will see, I think on one of the videos I wrote that I did, that the example they had in one of the books that I copied from, they had actually done it in the wrong order. Okay, and once in a while you find that on the sheet, on a worksheet. Okay, but always check right up here to get the right corresponding order. So step 2, I would have had this just as a step 2, CD, segment CD is congruent segment CD, reflexive property of congruence. Okay, then I go ahead and look back up at my definitions. I make sure it's marked. There's my CD, congruent CD right there. Okay, and now I go ahead, that's the only one that I have as of right now, number 2, that I have marked on the drawing yet. Okay, because I haven't done these other pieces yet. I see the perpendicular symbol. So you can think of that as another vocab word. So since segment CD is perpendicular to AB, I know that angles ADC and BDC are right angles. So I would have gone ahead and either done this. It doesn't matter the order. I could have done either one. I'm just, since perpendicular happened to be first, I'm just doing that. So anytime it's perpendicular, you can now say the two angles are right angles. And that's, and notice that it says perpendicular lines. They should have said perpendicular segments because these are both segments, right? I wouldn't mark you down for it if it said lines. Again, on the DCAS, it's going to be a drop-down menu you're going to be choosing from. And so your definition, so perpendicular lines form right angles. That's the definition of perpendicular. So remember I said on the DCAS, I read out the definitions themselves. You could have written definition. I'm fine with you writing definition of perpendicular. Okay. Anytime you're dealing with a vocab word in the given, for example, it's going to be definition of that vocab word. Like I said, on the DCAS, they usually don't write definition of it. They'll actually write out what that definition means. The definition of perpendicular means perpendicular lines form right angles. That's why we're able to say both of these are right angles. Now that both right angles, now we can say in this next step that those two angles are congruent because all right angles are congruent. Okay. And that would be something that you could see on the DCAS. So now we have where we can go ahead and draw in our right angles right there. And we know they're congruent because we just shown it right there by definition of all right angles being congruent. And lastly, for my vocab, I have the midpoint. D is the midpoint. Well, if it's a midpoint, that means it splits it in half. It's the middle point right there. So that's why then you see up here, A segment AD is congruent to DB. Again, look for corresponding order. AD is congruent to BD. I look at the congruent statement up there to make sure I put it in the right corresponding order. I could have said DA and DB, but I have to make sure it's in corresponding order. And that's definition of midpoint. Okay, definition of midpoint. I would take that. On the DCAS, like I said, they'll write out what that means. A midpoint divides a segment into two congruent segments. Okay, so you're seeing the definition written out here, and that's how it would be on the DCAS. You don't have to worry about memorizing that, word for word because it's drop-down menu. So you're going to choose that definition. Obviously, the key is you're seeing midpoint in there. Okay, so that should tell you that's going to be the definition of midpoint. All right, so now we can go ahead and identify those two pieces as being congruent on our drawing. And so do we have enough now to prove the two triangles congruent? Yes, we do by SAS. And so we have enough to prove what's asking us to prove. And that's therefore always your last step. And I write down just exactly as it says up top. And why did we say it was congruent? SAS. You don't say SAS congruent to SAS, you just say SAS. Okay, so there's that proof in explaining all the steps and how they come about. Okay, let's quickly, here's a potential DCAS type question. I just found this set of a bunch of problems. In the diagram below, triangle AGE and OLD, angle GAE is congruent to LOD right there. And the distance, our segment AE is congruent to OD right there. Okay. To prove that those two triangles are congruent by SAS, remember we did this on the worksheet already, down at the bottom of that page. We need to be SAS. What other information is needed? Well, where's that other SAS? I have A and S, so I put the A there, that'd be by ASA. They don't want by AS, so we don't want that angle because that would be ASA. They want SAS, so SAS right there, SAS right there. So we need those two segments to be congruent. So where do we see that? Segment AG is congruent to OL right there. We could have wiped out 3 and 4 because they're dealing with angles. Okay, we need two sides and an angle. We had a side and angle, so we need another side. So we can only pick between 1 and 2 in this case. Now, you need to understand why it's not this one, because that's set up as SSA. If I did that, and remember there is no SSA, so you can't pick that particular segment at all. Okay, because that's an SSA. And remember, we don't have SSA, we have S little SA, but no SSA. And you're not going to see the S little SA on the DCAS either. All right, let's go on to, so by the way, on the DCAS, how it will be on a proof is they will give you either the statement and have that filled in, and you pick from a drop-down menu the reason, also called justification, or they will give you the justification and you have to fill in the statement that goes along with that justification from a drop-down menu. Okay, so that is the one nice thing. You're not having to do an entire proof from scratch. There might be one that you do in a box, you know, where you do explain it and you can write it out in 2 columns if you want, or just explain the whole thing in words. They might have one of those. But they will for sure have one of what I just showed you, where they have the statement given, you fill in the reason, or vice versa. That's guaranteed. All right, so remember, step 1, givens. So I'm just going to circle that to save time and put it right there. In my justification given, you'd actually write out those givens there. Okay. Then I go ahead and mark it AC. Notice it's not marked here yet. AC is congruent to CB. And that's all I have I can mark right now. CD just bisects it. Remember, bisects means splits in half. Okay, and therefore it's going to be a midpoint. The bisector creates a midpoint. Okay. So I'll show you and explain in 2 different ways of how you could possibly see that. All right. So there's step 1. Step 2, remember I told you we want to get our what? Our free point. What can we get on our own? We have a shared side right here. So reflection property. So now here's how I'm going to look again. Remember, I'm going to look at the triangle congruence right here to make sure I have it in the correct corresponding order. DC, segment DC is congruent to segment DC. Reflection property of congruence. Okay, and now I have that marked. Okay, now remember, since I have a vocab word, I know I have to use that vocab word. It's not, they don't give it to you for some reason. Since this segment bisects AB, they may let you go ahead and say right away segment AD is going to BD by definition of bisector. Okay, or they might say that the bisector creates a midpoint. So if it's that way, they would say D is a midpoint, and then that is by definition of bisector. Okay, now that I've said it's a midpoint, remember that's another vocab word. Now I'm going to use that definition of that vocab word to be able to say now segment AD is congruent to segment BD by definition of midpoint. Okay. Like I said, they might let you jump right to step 4, not have to do step 3. And if it was, then you'd be able to say definition of bisector right away for AD being congruent to BD. But in case they don't, bisector is going to go through the midpoint. So you can say D is midpoint by definition of bisector. So now you've created another vocab word here, and now I can use that definition in my next statement right here. So now I have that those two segments are congruent. And now I have enough to prove that the two triangles are congruent, and I copy down exactly the order that it has right there. BDC, and why are these two triangles congruent? Everybody should be able to see it is SSS, and I'm done. Okay. If it asked about one of the corresponding sides, if it said to prove angle A was congruent to angle B, then my final step would be angle A is congruent to angle B by CPCTC. Remember, use the CPCTC after you've proven the triangle is congruent, never before. So I've said this on videos, and I don't know why on tests I get kids trying to prove triangles congruent by CPCTC. That can never prove a triangle congruent. You already know the 5 ways, but these kids don't memorize that. And CPCTC can only be used after proving triangles congruent. Okay, so don't use it before. CPCTC, if you're going to use it, is usually your last justification in a proof. All right, then I'll go ahead and end it.